Having me.
There is so much to talk about, so let's get the easy ones out of the way. The NSE yesterday, dipping only very slightly for the 20-share index. There's a big block trade on EABL. What stood out for you from the activity yesterday?
So, I mean, that was a monster trade. I think that was the biggest trade I've seen this year in EABL. It was about 0.75% of the shares of the company, so a big trade. I think I'm bullish about EABL. I think competition is going to nibble at the edges, but they're not really going to be able to make much of an impact. I like the growth I saw. Johnny Walker sales up 74%. That's a big number, and people should focus on things like that. That stood out for me. Kenyan Cobil was down very, very sharply. They produced a very poor first half number. They got their FX hedging all wrong. They obviously took the hedge out when we were at 100. I'm quite bullish on the shilling, actually. I think it's going to stay steady around these levels, and they've been caught out on that, so that was a big mover. But I think Kenol is really about the takeover of Puma Energy, and they're still going to pay a premium.
And the general manager, David Ohana, has actually been sued by some staff for contempt of court because the court almost put an injunction against this operation, but they seem very keen to let this go through, and they're almost going against this court directions.
Well, it's obviously there's a lot of noise and interference, but I think the end game is that Puma Energy are going to snaffle up Kenyan Cobil. It's more about inserting themselves into a red-hot oil and gas space across the African eastern seaboard, and that's just continuing to take off. And this is a way for them to come into that landscape.
And that forex hedge loss you're talking about is they did a brilliant thing, at least in the PR world, which is they released it on Friday afternoon when all of us had gone to the bar. Nobody was looking at it any too keenly until over the weekend and Monday. It was almost old news.
That's a 21st century lesson, isn't it, in PR? But I think people will look at it. It's a serious misstep on the foreign exchange side. Plus, they were obviously long and wrong, a lot of inventory on the way down. But that you get that kind of volatility around earnings. But I think ultimately this is a story about Trafigura's Puma Energy seeking a foothold in what is a red-hot oil and gas space.
All right, we'll talk about, let's go ahead and talk about the red-hot oil and gas space, which is this mineral, the discovery of gas off Malindi.
Yes.
This is, well, we don't know whether it's commercially viable as yet, but it's good news, isn't it?
It's excellent news, and the news has been coming fast and furious from the south as far as Maputo, and I think it's going to include all the way up to Mogadishu. I've got no reason to believe that we're not sitting on a great energy prize, and I think increasingly it's tipping over the radar. So yesterday, whilst, we didn't find tons of oil, we found gas. There's a lot of bullishness. Pan-Continental rallied 90% on the Aussie exchange. That doesn't happen in many places.
The fact that we have gas, and if we could commercially exploit these, do we become energy efficient, or do we even start becoming reliant on ourselves? We've got oil all over the place, we've got gas.
I think what we've got to be very careful about is that we don't go the Nigerian route. I think we've got to build refinery capacity on this eastern seaboard of Africa. And I think ultimately in the medium term we go into a surplus position on energy. And that's a very bullish medium term thing. I think the issues around the insecurity, Tana River again, blowing up, spiking, the MRC in Mombasa, the Uamsho in Zanzibar are things to remain worried about, and we've got to find a solution to those problems.
All right, let's talk about banking for a second. It's our Banking on Africa Day here, and KCB and CFC Stanbic have both just yesterday cut the lending rates after that central bank's 350 basis points rate cut. Were you wrong on that? What were you expecting?
Well, I was expecting 300, and that was only because I just didn't think they were going to be that bold. But I think they did the right thing. I think they're going to cut again. And I think both KCB and CFC Stanbic are ahead of the curve. This is the time when you cut your base rate, you talk about it, you get ahead of the pack. Rates are going down, it's inevitable. You couldn't hold the base rate so far above the CBR rates. I commend them, and I think that's part of my prognosis. The second half, the rally into year end, is going to be via easier monetary policy and some very fat dividend stocks when you compare it to what the money markets are paying now.
But the CBR is now at 13%. The average rate, even if we're really bullish, would be around 18%. That is still very high.
It's still very high, and I think it's very restrictive, and I think that spread between the CBR and bank base rates is way too wide, that credit spread, and I think, I'm sure the central bank is going to be encouraging the banks to narrow that. But I think we're going to see a further reduction and a bit of narrow.
Up to 10%, Aly-Khan?
I think we're going to see, yes, and I'll tell you why. The problem is we're getting masses of a tsunami of funny money globally is hitting the system, whether it's Mario Draghi's Super Mario plan, which, by the way, is extraordinarily good, or it's going to be more QE from the Fed. Today, the homes for that money, the Swiss franc, the Brazilian real, are no longer there.
Yes.
And it's quite contrarian, but I expect quite a bit of money to come into Africa. If you look across the African indices, we're at 15-month highs in Nigeria. Egypt is up 56, 57%. Nairobi's up near a 12-month high.
Yes.
And I see that rally getting extra traction now, actually, into the year end.
So Citi has ranked actually the NSE as one of the best performing stocks, but I want to move on to the shilling, which is so far holding steady, but that's because the central bank is very aggressive in the mop-up activity. How does this play out in the long term?
I think the majority of people are looking for some weakening in the shilling to about 85.50, 86, 86.50. I don't see that happening. I think the shilling is going to be confound everybody. It's going to remain firm. It's going to stay around 84. Our interest rates in a world where everybody's paying zero or near zero are extremely high and handsome.
Yes.
And I think in that context, and with the central bank having re-established its credentials, I think the shilling will behave very well. Obviously, all bets are off if the price of crude oil surges, because that has the ability to crater our current account deficit, and that changes the dynamics. But for now, I think we can handle the situation as we find it.
Something significant happened in the law courts yesterday. Three former high-ranking tourism ministry officials were sent to jail. Aly-Khan, this does not happen in this country.
It's, you know,
this country has changed. A former permanent secretary going to court for 3 years. A former managing director of the Kenya Tourist Board jailed. A former board member. We've never seen anything of this sort.
And I think it boils down to a single individual and a constitutional document, and that individual being the Chief Justice, William Matunga. I think he's unbelievable. He's a game changer. And I think he's a catalyst to bring in this new Kenya that we're all looking for, and which we need, because we're sitting on the cusp of incredible prosperity, and we need to manage it well in order to take ourselves where we want to go. But I cannot underestimate his influence, and I think the courts have become extremely brave and right. And people are going to be behind the courts in a big way, and I think it's going to make them a very popular institution. And, you know, Hillary Clinton popped in to see him, and she doesn't pop in to see many people.
Exactly,
that's, you know, commensurate with his stature, both here and abroad.
And the message this points is that if you're involved in government, if we give you some sort of role, then you must be held accountable. And if you do not behave in a manner that we feel is satisfactory, then you'll be held before court. This
is the game changer across the African continent. We could never hold anybody to account, and it's suddenly changing, and it's changing very dramatically. And I think there's going to be a lot of damage amongst the politicians who just don't get how fast things are changing. And today, you know, we have the power amongst the people to put pressure to bear upon our politicians, and I think that's really a very big inflection point across the continent.
Unfortunately, also there's some bad news, which is this latest clashes in Tana River in the coast of the country. 38 more people dead, inter-clan clashes. It gives a sense of the government is not really in control, and therefore investors and everybody else who's thinking even coming here for tourism is a bit afraid.
Well, I was very worried when the assassination happened of Sheikh Abu Drogo. I thought we were going to get a tsunami of travel advisories, and we were going to morph into Waziristan or something. But I think, you know, we're seeing lots of spikes all across that Swahili coast. I mean, it's not just Tana River. We saw it in Mombasa. We've seen it in Zanzibar. And I think we've got what looks uncorrelated might begin to conflate and amplify.
There's some lines that we can draw among these.
Yes, and I think given the sensitivity, the fines offshore, we've really got to manage this well. So I'm worried about it. I think it's a risk, and I think so far it doesn't look as if our government is on top of it.
Yes. What do they need to do? Because sometimes you almost get a feeling that the top executive officials have buried their head in the sand and might release their statements once in a while, and then that's it.
I think, you know, they've got to really swamp it with security personnel and put a stop to it, just like they did in Mombasa when the president went visiting. You know, it's not just about where the president's going, it's about security of our people, and I think they should do exactly what they did in Mombasa, where they damped it down very, very quickly around the time of the show. So I think that's what they need to do, and they need to be seen to be doing it.